How could I have been so stupid? I muttered under my breath, my hands shaking as I struggled to refasten the button on my cardigan. The welcoming party was still in full swing, laughter and glasses clinking mixing with the music still pouring from the speakers. But all I could focus on was the image burned into my mind. My husband, Ethan, locked in a passionate embrace with Clara, the daughter of one of my new mother-in-law Marianne's oldest friends. Hands roving feverishly, they'd stumbled halfway up the stairs, seeming oblivious to the partygoers still mingling on the lower level. I felt sick. Less than an hour ago, Ethan had twirled me around the makeshift dance floor Marianne had set up for our welcome celebration, whispering, "I love you," into my hair. And now this. As I paced in agitation, Marianne appeared at my side, her usual tight smile fixed on her face. "There you are, dear. Come and meet the Walters. They've been dying to talk to you all night." I took a deep breath. "Perhaps you can entertain the Walters for just a moment, Marianne. I need to speak with my husband rather urgently." My polite tone barely concealed the rage simmering underneath. But if Marianne noticed, she gave no indication. "Oh, Ethan's likely just stepped out for a smoke with the boys." She waved one perfectly manicured hand. "I'm sure whatever it is can wait until the party wraps up." I clenched my jaw, shrugging off the proprietary hand Marianne tried to place on my elbow. Civility was not going to get me the answers I needed tonight. Taking the stairs two at a time, I scanned the darkened second level, the music from the party a dull throb as I moved down the shadowy hallway. The second door on the left was ajar, a thin sliver of muted light spilling through the opening. Heart-hammering, I kicked it open with one foot. There was a short, shocked scream quickly muffled. But not before I glimpsed Ethan hurriedly disentangling himself from Clara's embrace, the young woman attempting unsuccessfully to close the top buttons of her blouse. My eyes zeroed in on the prominent love bite blooming on the curve where her neck met bare shoulder. Bile rose in my throat even as Ethan straightened his tie, clearing his throat gruffly. "Lena, this isn't what it looks like, darling." He stepped forward pleadingly, even as Clara shrank back against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself. Her head was bowed, but not before I caught the gleam of smug satisfaction in her eyes at having been discovered in a compromising position with my husband. My mind spun, synapses firing as I connected dots that now seemed so apparent. The possessive hand Marianne kept on Ethan's arm when they spoke, as if subtly staking her claim. Her thinly veiled barbs making it clear I fell short of the standards she'd set for a daughter-in-law. Clara's presence at every intimate family gathering, despite her not being related. The evidence had been there all along. I'd just chosen to ignore it. Trusting my husband to honor our vows, I dismissed Marianne's antipathy as standard mother-in-law issues that would resolve over time. The same for Clara's constant presence in our lives. She was just a close family friend after all. But seeing them now, their current dishevelment removing all pretense, the blinders fell abruptly from my eyes. This went far deeper than an isolated tryst. Straightening my spine, I leveled a glare at my cheating spouse, seeing him clearly for the first time since our whirlwind courtship began. The charm I'd found so intoxicating once upon a time was merely a mask donned by a consummate liar. Don't insult my intelligence by attempting to make excuses, Ethan. The current situation makes it quite evident exactly what's been going on under my nose. Does your mother know that her little protégée Clara has been spreading her legs for married men? Or is this type of behavior Marianne endorses as long as it gets me out of the family picture? I rifled through my purse for what felt like the 100th time, searching in vain for my car keys. I was already running late for my lunch meeting, thanks to Marianne cornering me on my way out the door to chat. 30 minutes later, I'd finally managed to extricate myself from her thinly veiled interrogation about my plans and whereabouts. Another fruitless pass through my bag, and I felt my last thread of patience snap. Marching to the bottom of the stairs, I yelled up, "Ethan, have you seen my car keys? I'm late already." The thump of footsteps preceded my husband's appearance at the top of the stairs. He paused halfway down, keys dangling from his fingertips. "Looking for these?" His tone aimed for nonchalant, but didn't quite hit the mark. My eyes narrowed. "Yes, thank you," I replied briskly, holding out an expectant hand. "If you borrow my keys, please return them to my purse." Ethan trotted down the remaining steps but made no move to hand the keys over. I just got preoccupado when I didn't see your car in the drive. Thought I'd come check and make sure you didn't need anything before heading into work. The keys disappeared into his pocket as he attempted an injured look. I am your husband, you know. I resisted the very real urge to roll my eyes. Barely 2 weeks since the disastrous welcome party where I'd caught him en flagrante with Clara, and he actually expected me to buy this newly solicitous routine? How lucky I am, then, to have such a considerate spouse, I bit out, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Now give me my damn keys, Ethan. I have a meeting to get to. For a long moment, we stared at each other, locked in impasse. Ethan attempting sincerity, undermined by the muscle ticking in his jaw, while I crossed my arms stubbornly, refusing to rise to the bait. Just as I opened my mouth to inform him exactly where he could shove his fake thoughtfulness, hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs. Marianne bustled up, fur stealing fluttering dramatically around her shoulders, car keys clutched triumphantly in one hand. Lena, dear, heading out? I'll walk you. We wouldn't want you getting lost now, would we? Her tone was all sweetness underlaid with venom. Without waiting for agreement, she looped her arm firmly through mine, expertly maneuvering us towards the door. As we stepped outside, she steered me firmly towards her Mercedes rather than my own car. Catching the direction of my glare, she laughed brightly. Oh, I'll have Raymond swing back and pick up your car later, don't worry. We'll just chat on the way to your little lunch meeting, and you can tell me all about this new job you've picked up. I bit my tongue hard enough to draw blood, swallowing the furious words I desperately wanted to spew. Of course, Marianne knew exactly why I suddenly needed to resume working, just like she knew precisely why I was no longer wearing my wedding ring. Her sources had obviously kept her appraised of my appointment filing for divorce, as she prattled on about acceptable conversations for the country club and which of her society friends I simply must meet, my hands clenched into fists. This is what my life had become, constantly hydraulic pressured by Marianne's manipulations into the proper little wife mold. Forced betrayal by my lying cheat of a husband had crushed all remaining illusions on that front. I refused to be molded further by his scheming mother. As Marianne's Mercedes cruised sedately through the upper-crust neighborhood, my mind turned over the facts at hand. This situation would require careful strategy. Playing nice was no longer an option. I needed to send a message, loud and clear enough that neither Marianne nor her wretch of a son ever thought to cross me again. I'd been the victim too long. Time for the games to end. I slid into the back corner booth at Sal's diner, eyes instinctively scanning the sparse late-night crowd. The garish overhead lighting did little to illuminate the shadowed corners. Perfect for a covert meeting. Right on cue, the bell over the entrance jangled, announcing a new arrival. I glimpsed a figure pause in the doorway, face obscured by a lowered ball cap. After a moment, they moved towards my booth. I took a bracing sip of bitter black coffee as they slid into the seat across from me. The brim of the cap tilted up, revealing a rugged, handsome face set with sharp blue eyes that swept the diner before settling on me. Mrs. Hall, I presume? His voice was a low rumble. I inclined my head in greeting. Mr. Collins? Call me Troy. He settled back against cracked vinyl. So what can I do for you? I cleared my throat, wrapping both hands around the warm ceramic mug, using the heat to steady my nerves. My husband is having an affair with a family friend. Has been for months, possibly longer given how comfortable they seemed. Bile still rose in my throat, picturing Ethan pawing desperately at Clara. Troy regarded me steadily. You have proof of the affair? My laugh sounded brittle to my own ears. Well, unless he's in the habit of shoving his tongue down random women's throats, then yes, I'd say walking in on them seconds away from doing the deed counts as proof. One dark eyebrow quirked. In that case, this seems pretty cut and dried. You filing for divorce, I assume? What is it you need from me exactly, Mrs. Hall? Pictures for court evidence? I shook my head before realizing Troy probably couldn't see the motion under my oversized sun hat. I've already filed, but this goes deeper than my wandering husband. The woman involved? She's the little protégée of my mother-in-law, Marianne, groomed to take my place, apparently. Troy let out a low whistle. Now that provides some context, doesn't it? You think your husband's mommy dearest put him up to this? My jaw tightened. I think my mother-in-law never wanted me married to her precious son in the first place. She's been passive-aggressively trying to undermine me since the wedding. This thing with her charity case, Clara, just seems rather conveniently timed. I met Troy's gaze. I didn't hire you to gather divorce evidence. I want the dirt to bury Mary Ann's lily-white reputation for good. A slow grin spread. Trying to take out Mommy Dearest for orchestrating your humiliation? I like your style, Mrs. Hall. He withdrew a small notebook from his jacket pocket along with an expensive-looking pen. All right, let's nail down some details. Full names, addresses, places they frequent, friends in common. The more background I have to work with, the faster I can dig up actionable intel. For the next 20 minutes, spun out everything I knew about Ethan, Mary Ann, and her little snake, Clara. Credit card statements and cell phone bills I'd photographed, schedules, even clothing sizes. Troy dutifully noted it all, asked sharp questions to fill in any gaps. Finally, I passed over a photo clipped from the society pages. Clara smiled brightly from her place beside a tuxed-clad Ethan at some museum fundraiser. Her arm curled just a bit too proprietarily around my husband's elbow. Seeing it still ignited a spark of rage I was quickly coming to enjoy. Tucking the intel away, Troy slid out from the booth. He held out one calloused hand. Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Hall. I'll be in touch within 48 hours. And I promise, before long, both those bastards will sincerely regret the day they tried to cross you. The jangle of the bell punctuated his exit. I clenched my fingers around the cooling mug. Checkmate. My opponents had just walked themselves straight into a lion's den, built of their own lies and hubris. And I would revel in every moment as it collapsed down around their heads. I tapped one Jimmy Choo against the marble floor impatiently, eyeing the delicate crystal face of my Cartier watch. Nearly 20 minutes past our meeting time, and still no sign of Clara. Honestly, after all the groveling texts and calls she'd flooded me with since her sordid entanglement with Ethan had come to light, you'd think she could at least be bothered to show up on time. Thieverted eyes and whispers since the showdown at the party had been somewhat gratifying. But Mary Ann was a cunning adversary. I didn't doubt she already had a contingency scheme in motion to claw back her veneer of respectability, spinning Clara as the temptress who had cruelly seduced then jilted her precious only son. I needed an airtight offense to maintain the upper hand, which is how I found myself seated at a discreet corner table in the hushed elegance of the Four Seasons tea room, awaiting the little homewrecker herself. As if conjured by my agitated thoughts, a flustered Clara appeared through the etched glass doorway, flustered gaze finding me immediately. Dark curls had been hastily tamed into a knot, and she clutched an expensive-looking trench tight around herself despite the mild weather as she hurried over. "Lena, I'm so sorry. My appointment ran long and then I couldn't find this place." She trailed off at my narrowed eyes, having the grace to look embarrassed as she took the seat opposite me. For long moments, I let the silence stretch between us, taking petty satisfaction in watching her squirm. Finally, I broke the tension. "I assume you actually do want to discuss why I asked you here today, Clara? Or shall I just relay the private investigator's findings about your extracurricular activities to the Charity League board myself?" I kept my gaze fixed on her over the rim of my teacup, allowing just a hint of threat to seep into my tone. Clara paled so fast I feared she might actually faint. "You can't. I mean, please don't." She collected herself with a visible effort. "I know I've made some very foolish choices lately, Lena. I never dreamed things with Ethan would go so far. Your mother-in-law can be very persuasive." I set my cup down with crisp finality. "Let's not pretend Mary Ann didn't groom you as a backup plan from the moment her son brought me home, Clara. Though I am curious, did she promise you marriage and status? Or just to be kept in comfortable circumstance as her errant son's mistress?" Clara looked stricken. When she finally replied, her voice was barely a whisper. "She always insisted Ethan would leave you, that it was only a matter of time before you drove him away." A single tear traced down one cheek, leaving a smudge of mascara in its wake. "I thought he loved me, Lena. Mary Ann promised I would finally have the family I always wanted." Her hazel eyes were luminous with pain when they finally met my assessing gaze. In that moment, Seeing past the artifice and manipulation, I caught a glimpse of the lonely young woman hidden underneath, desperate for connection and willing to grasp at any promise of love and belonging. Reaching across the table, I grasped her hand firmly in mine. Clara froze, staring at our joined hands in shock. When I spoke, my voice was gentle, but uncompromising steel lay beneath the soothing tones. "Oh, my dear Clara, Marianne spins such delicious dreams, doesn't she? But her promises are founded on nothing but lies and deceit. Now," I infused warmth into my smile, "why don't we discuss how you can help me make her pay for all those shattered dreams?" I stared critically at my reflection, turning this way and that to ensure perfection. The royal purple wrap dress hugged my curves before flaring just above the knee. Matching heels gave me a respectable 3-inch boost, enough height to use physical intimidation to my advantage. After hours of focused study, every angle of my look was designed to project power, confidence, and imminent threat. Tonight was too pivotal to leave a single detail to chance. A hesitant rap at the bedroom door broke my stare down with the mirror. I beckoned entry without turning. Clara's pale face appeared as the door swung open cautiously. I met her uncertain eyes in the reflection. "You're certain about this, Lena?" Her fingers twisted anxiously around the delicate gold chain at her throat. I smoothed both hands slowly, deliberately down my hips, fingertips brushing imagined-away lint before turning to face her. When I spoke, steely purpose resonated through every syllable. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Clara. The time has come for Marianne to reap the consequences of her despicable actions." My head tilted to the side, assessing her doubts. "Unless you're getting cold feet." Clara ducked her head at the implicit challenge in my query. When she again met my gaze, there was reluctant resolve lurking in the hazel depths. "No, no cold feet here." Her chin lifted stubbornly. "Let's go make that bitch pay." Triumph ignited in my chest. I stepped forward, grasping Clara's shoulders firmly, waiting until her chin tipped up. My hands squeezed, forcing eye contact. "You have your recording device?" At her faint nod, I continued. "Good. Capture every poisonous word my mother-in-law spews tonight. We're going to hang her and Ethan, both publicly with their own hateful confessions." Linking her arm through mine, I propelled us towards the door, lethal stilettos clicking in time like the final march of a conquering army. I tossed one last comment over my shoulder. "Remember, timing is everything tonight. Let me set the bait publicly. Then you start feeding Marianne shots. Once good and drunk, coax out her true vitriol on record." I met Clara's glance sidelong as we descended the staircase. "Shouldn't be difficult. Getting that harpy monologuing is child's play." We emerged through carved double doors onto the expansive flagstone patio, already crowded with my husband's extended family. An ostentatious ice sculpture depicting rolling vineyard hills loomed over the Jordan's family tradition 30th anniversary gala in full swing. I noted Ethan and Marianne holding court across the patio, backs currently turned from our approach. Perfect. I paused, turning and grasping Clara fiercely by both shoulders, forcing her gaze to mine. "Stick to the plan no matter what. No backing down." My nails bit into her bare shoulders. "We end this tonight." Clara's eyes hardened, mouth set in a determined line. "End it tonight." Her agreement was absolute, the vow of co-conspirators bonded in righteous revenge. With a brusque nod, I spun on one spiked heel, striding directly into my adversary's midst. The click of my steps across old stone was muffled by festive conversation. Drawing up directly behind Marianne, I slid one proprietary hand up Ethan's stiff spine, nails scraping suggestively on his neck before tangling into the hair at his nape. "Hello, darling." I purred loudly as he jumped. Pressing full bodily to his side, I molded my curves deliberately to him. "Why don't you introduce me to your friends?" Without waiting, I extended a hand, never breaking eye contact with his panicked gaze. "I'm Ethan's wife, Lena." My tongue caressed the title. "So pleased to finally meet more members of my husband's family." On my periphery, I watched Marianne turn an alarming shade of mottled purple, and I knew we had them both right where we wanted them. Showtime. The festive hum died abruptly as I strode to the center of the patio, the tapping spike of my heels punctuating the silence. All eyes fixed on me standing alone, a single spotlit performer about to embark on her greatest public spectacle. I let anticipation build as I slowly, deliberately brushed imaginary dust from the skirt of my dress before smoothing both hands slowly up my torso to rest just below my collarbone. A performer preparing to deliver the performance of a lifetime. In my periphery, I watched Marianne's face model, lips thinning to bloodless marks as rage built. Perfect. Let the harpy stew in her fury. I was just getting warmed up. I started slowly. When I married Ethan after our whirlwind romance, it seemed I'd found the happy ending that eluded me for so long. A handsome, charming husband. Here I blew a mocking kiss to Ethan's pale, stunned face. The promise of family support and acceptance, true love finally realized. I clasped both hands to my heart theatrically before spearing the silent crowd with a glare. What a naive, trusting fool I was. Contempt dripped from each syllable. Turns out the loving family I longed for is in actuality little more than a poisonous nest of lies spun by manipulative snakes. My hand carved a slicing arc toward Marianne, with that soulless harridan occupying the coveted spot of chief viper. An outraged gasp rippled through the gathering. On the edge of the crowd, I glimpsed Clara, white-knuckled hands clenched around her clutch. Our eyes locked, and I inclined my head just fractionally. Showtime, little mouse. Start recording the symphony of lies about to spill from Marianne's poison lips. Right on cue, Marianne surged forward, talon-like nails biting into my arm as she attempted to drag me forcibly from my spotlight. I shook her off easily, putting several feet of distance between us as she seethed. "You unstable little bitch! Who the hell do you think you're speaking to?" I softly, allowing a small smirk to lift the corner of my mouth. So predictable, and so accommodatingly providing the perfect opening. "Why, Marianne? I'm merely addressing the woman who orchestrated my husband's affair in a bid to undermine our marriage." "Tell me." I cocked my head, all wide-eyed faux confusion. "Exactly what promises did you make Clara if she succeeded in luring Ethan away from me as your dutiful little protégé?" Marianne reeled back as if struck before rallying with a sneer. "As if you were ever worthy of my son, you pretentious shrew. Don't pretend this mess is anything but your own failings as a wife." "Oh, please." My responding laugh was razor-edged. "We both know you've been salivating to replace me with your malleable little pet, Clara, from the moment I stepped foot in this family." I stepped back into Marianne's space, meeting her glare for glare. When I continued, acid dripped from each word intended to scar. "Tell me, Marianne, does it chafe knowing despite your manipulations, you still failed to get your son's whore ensconced in my place?" My hand folded into a parody of a listening cup. "Do share your decades-long dream for your little protégé. I'm positively riveted." Behind Marianne's shoulder, I spotted Clara slipping silently away, clutching her glittering clutch like a hard-won prize. Mission accomplished, little mouse. Now time to salt this vicious bitch's earth permanently. With hatred blazing from her eyes, Marianne launched into the diatribe I knew simmered just below her polished surface. Vitriol poured from her, revealing uglier and uglier truths as her fury mounted. The gathered crowd muttered, backing slowly away in distressed shock at her unveiled bigotry and heartless callousness so at odds with her carefully crafted image. I just leaned back with one elegantly heeled foot crossed casually behind the other and let her verbally damn herself straight to social hell. After all, it wasn't slander if the poison spilled straight from the viper's fangs unprompted. And I, for one, was all too happy to step back and give Marianne's hatred the wide-open stage it deserved to wreck the last shreds of her reputation. Checkmate indeed. I kept my expression neutral, watching Marianne's meltdown from my position, leaning casually against the weathered stone balustrade. Her venom had long since dissolved into inarticulate shrieking as she alternatively spewed and spat at the remaining crowd. Even her staunchest sycophants had finally abandoned pretense, distancing themselves physically as Marianne's epic tantrum raged. Out the corner of my eye, I tracked Ethan approaching with placating hands extended, his desperate attempts at damage control coming several chapters too late. "Mother, please, you have to get control of yourself." I couldn't restrain a delicate snort, as if anything could rein in the vile monster Marianne had revealed herself to be tonight. Short of someone knocking her cold, the harridan looked set to continue shredding society's good opinion to tatters unabated. How fortuitous my provocation had finally ripped the last veneer of polish from the fetid core barely concealed underneath. At Ethan's approach, Marianne pivoted unsteadily on one stiletto, glare venomous enough to drop a charging bull in its tracks. Ethan actually recoiled under the weight of her unrestrained hatred as she closed the space between them. "This is your fault." One red-tipped claw jabbed violently into his chest. "If you'd just rid us of that social climbing bitch when I told you to." She broke off, sputtering in renewed fury. Over her hunched shoulder, Ethan's panicked gaze met and briefly held mine. In the widened midnight blue depths, I read the truth of just how deep Marianne's manipulations ran. A dark undercurrent that apparently included directives to Ethan to forcibly remove me from their gilded circle. My answering glare spoke volumes on exactly my thoughts on attempted murder by proxy. "Now, Lena." Ethan made a visible effort to gentle his tone as he turned from the spectacle of his mother's continuing meltdown, placating hands extended in entreaty even as he moved cautiously in my direction. "Can't we talk about this rationally?" I remained motionless as stone under the weight of his pleading stare. In it, I now read the specters of the man I'd thought Ethan to be under those first bright illusions, earnest and loving, devoted to building a life and family together. Such a shame it had only ever been pretty mirage. I stared back coldly, refusing to be swayed by the ghosts of dreams already turned to ash in Marianne's toxic crucible. Ethan finally seemed to accept no excuse or charm offensive could dig him out of this particular hole. His hands dropped back to his sides, jaw clenched white. Behind him, the sounds of Marianne's caterwauling had gained a sharper, more desperate edge. The guests, still lingering, watched her breakdown with palpable disgust. I pushed lazily off my perch, adjusting the wrap of my dress fastidiously. As I moved to glide past Ethan's tense form, I paused, one hand coming to rest gently on his jaw. Slowly, I exerted the faintest pressure until resigned blue eyes swung back, meeting my steady gaze. I stretched to brush crimson lips feather soft against his ear. "Checkmate, darling," I purred. The brush of my heels across weathered stone was the only sound marking my dignified exit. Risking a glance over one shoulder, I spotted Ethan's silhouette still frozen in place, staring after me, the distant sounds of Marianne's shrieking, providing a siren's lament, marking the final wreckage of all their twisted ambitions. Right on cue, my phone vibrated with an incoming message. Clara's name flashed across the screen under a single line of text that to anyone else would appear innocuous. Stage set. Plan finalized. I allowed myself one sharp smile before clicking my phone decisively dark and slipping behind the tinted window of my waiting Uber. On to new beginnings indeed. With the finale I had carefully orchestrated tonight, Marianne and her sycophant son were finally about to exit stage left permanently. I strode confidently down the courthouse corridor, stilettos clicking sharply against marble. The lawyers traveling in my wake struggled to match my brisk pace. I barely slowed as I reached the carved double doors of Judgment 7, passing through into controlled chaos. The gallery was packed shoulder to tight shoulder. A susurrus of conversation competed with the shuffling and creaks from those that leapt hurriedly to their feet at my entrance. Ignoring the sensation that I'd stepped on stage at the climax of a Broadway production, I continued my clipped pace to the front row bench, left conspicuously empty despite the lack of room. As I settled, smoothing the skirt of my prim lapis suit across my knees, movement drew my eye to the front of the courtroom. A side door had been thrown open. 2 uniformed court officers escorted a struggling Marianne through. Her bangles clattered sharply with the violence of her attempts to shake them loose. Still, she made a good show of nonchalance, lifting her cuffed wrists to casually examine her crimson manicure. A 3rd officer followed closely behind, leading Ethan, grim-faced and resigned in his standard courthouse best. At the creak of the gallery pews, I watched recognition bloom in Marianne's eyes as they zeroed in on my presence. Her face immediately mottled, lips peeled back over bared teeth. "You vindictive bitch, this is entirely your doing." She surged against the sturdy grip holding her arms. Beside her, Ethan winced, head dropping low as if he could block out her venom. I merely allowed the slightest lift of one brow in response, keeping my body turned slightly away in clear dismissal of her fury. We'd see who was facing ruin soon enough. Plopping with exaggerated wariness on the bench, I crossed one dismissive leg, letting the lethal point of my stiletto do my reacting for me. Marianne's screeching rose stridently as the Honorable Judge Carmichael finally entered. The sharp report of his gavel cut through the noise. "Order! I will have order!" His flinty gray eyes swept the crowded room as silence slowly descended until only Marianne's ragged breathing could be heard. "Given the disruption of these proceedings by Mrs. Jordan, you will refrain from any further outbursts, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. Understood?" His icy stare bore down until Marianne gave one sharp nod. "Good. Let's proceed." Another heavy thump of wood on wood seemed to punctuate his statement with finality. Over the next excruciating 3 hours, I watched Marianne's life be methodically dismantled piece by piece. Chapter and verse details of her manipulations were dragged into the light. No family secret or rotten seed of corruption left unexamined under Clara's relentless testimony or visual evidence I provided. Through it all, Marianne stewed purple in rage, mouthing threats or spitting denials that Judge Carmichael swiftly cut off with that punishing gavel. Beside her, Ethan simply seemed to crumple further with each new sordid revelation. Finally, Clara fell silent, missionary zeal fading as she shifted nervously from foot to foot. Judge Carmichael removed wire glasses, setting them with precision atop the stack of evidence and testimonies. He shuffled papers needlessly before pinning first Marianne, then Ethan under that glacier stare. "Given the profound breach of ethics and morality evidenced by your actions, I hereby pronounce Marianne Jordan unfit to retain guardianship, henceforth within this state." His gavel rapped sharply once. "You will report at 10 a.m. tomorrow to the county probation office, where arrangements for your rehabilitation placement will be finalized." He cleared his throat gruffly, already moving to rise. "Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order on behalf of Miss Clara Wentworth and Mrs. Alina Hall against both defendants. Bailiff, please remove Mrs. Jordan to await her transport." A unified susurrus rose as the judge exited, disappearing through the side entrance. The room dissolved into chaos, but I remained seated, letting the courtroom empty. Clara's hand briefly brushed my shoulder as she passed, but we exchanged no words. None were needed. Together we had taken my power back, and now dealt the fatal blow to Marianne's legacy, raising her manipulations to rubble at our feet. Justice indeed.